Hello everyone, we're going to get started in just a few minutes, and in the meantime, let us know how you're currently making decisions for your digital and marketing programs. There's a poll up on your screen. Select the button that best fits your organization, and we'll launch the webinar in just a couple of minutes. Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on purchase intent, understanding customer behavior to drive sales. My name is Michelle Versteeg. I'm Director of Marketing with Cardinal Path and will serve as your moderator today. Thanks for participating in the poll that we launched a few minutes ago. It looks like a lot of people are using regular reporting and data around historical performance. At least that's the majority, so you're at the right webinar. If you have any questions throughout today's webinar, please submit them through the questions panel on your screen and we'll address them later in the presentation. You can also join the conversation on Twitter using #PurchaseIntent. We are recording this session, and everyone who registered will get an email with a link to the on-demand webinar within the next day or so. A bit about Cardinal Path. We're a digital data analytics firm that helps organizations unlock the value in their data and move the business forward based on those insights. Cardinal Path was named Most Influential Agency by the Digital Analytics Association for 2015, and our teams comprise some of the top minds in the digital and analytics space. Our aim is to share all that we know. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. With nearly a decade of work in the digital analytics field, Katie Birmingham helps companies make their websites and digital marketing work harder. Even before analyst was part of her title, Katie sought to understand how content influenced site objectives. Her dedication to using data to improve the customer experience led to her position with U.S. Cellular, where she oversees the analytics strategy for digital marketing and e-commerce. Katie's responsible for everything from data accuracy to site testing and optimization. She's an expert in Google Analytics, website optimization, tying KPIs to business objectives, and uncovering the true contribution of digital to the bottom line. Welcome, Katie. So glad to have you with us today.
Thanks, glad to be here.
And we've also got Dave Booth, who is a founding partner and principal consultant with Cardinal Path. He's advised and worked with organizations across 5 continents in web analytics and business intelligence, statistical analysis and testing, technology selection and deployment, and online and search marketing. He's also an author, instructor, adjunct, professor, and sought-after public speaker who was named Digital Analytics Association's Practitioner of the Year in 2014. Welcome, Dave, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'll just reiterate quickly before we get started that we are taking questions here through the interface, so if you have questions throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to pop them in, and we will have some time at the end here to address them. If we don't have time to get to your question, we will be following up with everybody offline after the presentation as well, so don't get discouraged if we're running out of time. Still ask those questions, and they will be answered. So we're going to kind of talk about a few things today, and what we're pleased to do is focus on purchase intent. And purchase intent is really just one of the subsets of a broader topic, which is predictive analytics. So we're very fortunate to live in a time right now that, I believe our children will look back as generations before look back on things like the Industrial Revolution and say we're living in the age of the data revolution. And I really think that, although a lot of these tools and techniques are not necessarily new, the ways in which we're able to use them, the speed at which we're able to collect data, and the amounts of data that we're able to collect are really changing the game for us and allowing us to really use predictive analytics, which is nothing more than using all of this data and applying some tools and methodologies to help us model what might be possible in the future or what might be likely to happen in the future based on the past. Now, there's a lot of different applications out there for predictive analytics, and again, it's not something that was born with the internet. It's been around for a long, long time. People were certainly doing this with pencil and paper and graph papers and slide rules. However, the processing speed that we have, the collection mechanisms that we have, this digital exhaust that's being left by every click of every digital device that we happen to be using around the internet is really, really making this an interesting topic for us to explore as digital marketers. So you see some things in here. Predictive analytics can be used for a number of different things. Number one, customer analytics. And again, this is nothing new. People have been doing things like predicting the lifetime value of a potential prospect or an existing customer and doing lead scoring scoring based on all the attributes and behaviors and actions that they could find out about those customers. Now, this may have lived in a point of sale system, it may have lived in a CRM system or customer relationship management system, or it may have lived in Excel spreadsheets or Post-it notes. There's lots and lots of different data sources out there that have lived through the years. Now these days we're collecting a lot of that digitally. We're storing that in an enormous amount of data in places like clouds and very large data repositories where we can access that data very quickly, and it makes it easy for us to start to use that in more advanced analysis. So from the customer perspective, we want to understand if people are likely to become a customer in the first place, so likelihood of acquisition. We want to understand the probability of them leaving us as a customer or staying loyal to us. So we have things like churn analysis. All these things are falling within this predictive realm. Now over on the marketing side, again, we're spending lots and lots of money in the digital space. We're approaching very large percentages of our marketing budgets that are going into digital mediums, and there's lots of different channels and lots of different touch points that we can invest in, whether it's search or display or real-time bidding or any of the programmatic, or whether it's social or email. All of these digital touch points require us to understand what is the likely return on the investment we're going to have here. So we have things like attribution modeling, which is essentially understanding where the value lies between each of these channels that we're touching. And we also start to understand, well, what if I, and then you can insert anything you want. What if I increased an email marketing campaign or used it for a different part of the funnel? I used it more as a branding and awareness campaign versus a lower funnel purchasing campaign. What would happen? And that's really where Predictive can start to help us. We can start to model what we would expect to happen and the probability of those outcomes. Now, one thing that we're going to be speaking specifically about today falls in this category, and that's purchase intent. And really what we're looking at there is what are the actions and the behaviors that we can collect from the digital experience. And that could be from the pre-click advertising that we're running, impression-based data, all the way to things that are happening on a website or a mobile app, and then all the way through the things that are happening in the offline stores or things that are happening in an online shopping cart. And we'll be presenting 3 case studies today here, 2 of which are focused on the offline purchase intent, and one of which is focused really on the online experience. So we get into customer and marketing, and that's really the root of what we're going to focus on today. And I'll just breeze through the rest because I think these are important for us to understand just from a background perspective. If you look down at the bottom, things like fraud detection or figuring out what sort of credit terms to offer someone before you actually do it. These are all using predictive analytics to understand risk analysis. And this has been, again, in place for a very, very long time. And of course, web we've talked a lot about. We'll talk a little bit more about throughout the webinar. And then, from an operations perspective, you can do things like optimize supply chains. You can look for advanced financial forecasting and whatnot based on these predictive elements as well. So predictive analytics is a pretty broad topic. And again, we're kind of focused in here on that specific purchase intent part of the marketing side of things for this webinar. Now what we want to do here is kind of introduce and walk through 3 case studies. We are fortunate enough to have a few people here on the line who can help to shed some light and further insight and details on them. And the first one that we're going to talk about here is going to go through the first thing that we believe predictive analytics and specifically purchase intent can do for an organization these days. Number 1 is that it can help us understand where we should be placing our marketing dollars. So it can help us understand that if we are marketing with specific objectives, and many people out there have moved from paying for clicks and impressions to paying for actions, whether that's a conversion, a micro conversion, or anything, we can start to understand through purchase intent how each of these micro conversions, each of these actions is actually valued. So whether it's a particular click on something that is a micro action that is leading up to a larger in-store purchase or online purchase, we can start to assign it value and then start to really work on our marketing budgets there according to those particular pieces of information so that we know every piece of media that we're buying is either profitable or not, and we can then market and prioritize our marketing budgets against that. The second one we'll be talking about here is a really interesting use case for predictive and specifically purchase intent, which is to understand what it is you should be testing. And we'll have Katie explain how US Cellular has been able to do that using purchase intent models that are out there. And then the last one we'll talk about is really one that's kind of all-encompassing, which is to say, how can we use predictive analytics or purchase intent to instill the right message at the right time to just the right person. And this is really getting at that goal we all have these days of this massive one-to-one marketing, which is a massive attempt to get to a very personalized sort of message at just the right time. And we can use these analytics to ensure that that message is getting to the right person with the highest probability of success. So with that, we're going to dive right into our first case study. And we're lucky enough to have Joe Nunziante on the line, who has been very, very close to this work at Cardinal Path. And Joe, maybe you could give us a quick background on the problem set and the background of the situation.
Sure thing. Good to be chatting with everyone here. Joe Nunziante, Director of Client Services here at Cardinal Path. And Dave, appreciate the kind of the tee up here. I think a really good example of how we use purchase intent to evolve digital optimization, that first of 3 items that you spoke of, comes from one of our automotive clients. And that's a bit of background here. They're a heavy player in digital marketing, well into 8 figures of spend, primarily in search, some display as well, email marketing too. And this client's got several agencies retained to help support planning, buying, optimization, kind of the full suite of digital media planning. And because they have no e-commerce functionality on the website, the agencies were instructed to optimize against 3 main things. Number 1, cost per store locator. 2, cost per call, mainly for mobile activity. And finally, cost per appointment metrics. So store locators, calls, and appointments that were made online. And why were they instructed to optimize against these metrics? Well, the organization felt confident that these website actions, locators, calls, creating an appointment, were good measures of future intent to take up revenue-driving action. That's all they were. Really, this was all guided by gut, but it did feel safer than optimizing against a click-through rate or a cost per click or an impression volume metric. Ultimately, their agencies were really just eager to know how the media and ultimately their own agency performance was going to be judged. Where were the goalposts? And our main objective with the purchase intent analysis was to try and identify the website actions that were truly most predictive of future in-store revenue for this client, and to quantify just how much revenue those actions actually predicted. Through this purchase intent analysis, we were able to isolate some of the specific website actions that were most responsible for driving in-store revenue, product by product. And while we did see that store locators, calls, and appointments to an extent did rise to the surface as important for some products, there definitely were a few surprises that came through and gave us the keys to help evolve our approach to digital media optimization even further, and give the agencies a clearer sense of their kind of report card moving ahead. So with that, Dave, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. And, I think a really important part that Joe is getting at here is that when we start to look at data, it's always really important to look at the segmentation aspect of it. So as Joe was mentioning, there are different products that are sold in the aftermarket for this particular industry vertical, and each of those is targeted at different people at different points of the process. So one of the things that we did here, which was pretty interesting, was we started to understand the breakdown of the different products and the types of folks and the types of situations those customers would be in order to purchase those particular products. And what the data told us was pretty interesting. A lot of it, like Joe said, was pretty intuitive, and then there were some surprises as well. First thing we found was that if people were pulled over on the side of the road, accessing a website from a mobile phone and looking at specific items here, they had a flat tire, they had something that kept them from getting home or to hobble into the nearest store, what we found was pretty intuitive, right? If they used the click-to-call or a store locator, they were very likely to come into an offline store and make a purchase for a service or a product here very, very quickly. So these two actions were examples of things that had a very, very high likelihood of predicting a future sale. And again, we were able through these models to place an actual dollar value on each of these things and many more. What we also found was kind of interesting. We found that if people were in areas of the website and they were looking for things that indicated that they had a problem now that was not urgent, which meant, you've all been in that situation where you're driving down the street and there's some kind of a strange noise coming from your car, but you're on the way to work, on the way to pick up the kids, on your way to do something. You're not going to get it fixed right now, but the next month or two you're going to have to get something fixed or looked at there. What we found was pretty interesting. These sorts of folks would actually go in and they would sign up for the email newsletters and they would look at the coupons pages. And the thinking behind this is that if you know you have to have some kind of a service done on your automobile in the next 30 to 60 days, just like if you know you're about to go out to dinner next week and you sign up for a newsletter, you're going to get a coupon to welcome you to that newsletter. So a lot of these people were thinking that if I sign up for this email newsletter, maybe I get 10% off of the service that I know I need here in the next 30, 60, 90 days. And this was a really interesting predictive factor, and it turned out that we could assign a relatively high value to getting people to sign up on a newsletter list if they were looking at pages that predicted they were in this sort of a situation. Now, the last one that we found here was very interesting as well. If you were looking at a big ticket item, something like a brand new set of all 4 tires, performance tires, or you were looking at something like an air conditioning recharge or something like that, what we found to be most predictive was people looking at the financing options of this particular organization. So as many of you know, retailers have deals made and they have their own credit cards and they can offer financing and they can offer terms when you sign up for that card. So usually you'll get a certain number of dollars off or discount points towards a future purchase, whatever that is, and consumers know this. So if they know they're going to be making a relatively large investment, they are interested in signing up for this credit card or this financing option to take advantage of those deals as well. And we found these to be very predictive for this particular segment of traffic. So ultimately you can see, these are just a couple of examples out of it, but in the end, the model is able to provide you with some very good clarity around what it is you should be trying to get people to do with your marketing spend. And as Joe said, this is really a great way to set the goalposts for the media buyers or the agencies or the in-house teams that you're working with so that they know exactly what it is they're optimizing against. Now, of course, this is kind of a mock-up here at the bottom, but I just wanted to show that at this point, this particular client has the ability to look at every one of those actions that they can be driving and all of the different products and segments that they have and have an idea of, well, if I can get a store locator click for someone who is showing interest in product number 3, as long as I'm not spending any more than $4.88, or in this case €4.88, I know I have a profitable campaign running. And this can really help to guide that media spend out there. And again, hold those who are spending that media accountable for the results that you're looking to get. So this is a good example here of that first use case for purchase intent, to understand exactly what you would be getting back for each of these elements that you're looking to drive through the marketing campaigns that you have. And again, I'll just reiterate that these values were not coming from e-commerce or online purchases. These models were built using the tools and technologies and methodologies that allowed us to predict the in-store revenue that was coming from the digital touchpoints and actions that were out there. So we're going to now hear a little bit about point number 2, which is an interesting way of using purchase intent to kind of optimize the testing plans that people have to really understand what it is you're optimizing against. And to do that, again, we're very lucky here to have Katie with us. And Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you to give a quick overview of US Cellular and the work that was done in purchase intent there.
Great, thanks, Dave. So for those of you who aren't familiar, just a quick intro for you here. US Cellular is one of the country's largest telecom companies. We serve 4.8 million customers and also have 23 stores across the country. In addition to retail, we also sell our products and services online, which is what we're going to talk about today. So if we move on to the next slide. For the past year or so, we've been throwing around a couple questions that are common to organizations who have both online and brick-and-mortar shopping. So the first of those is, what role does the website play in driving in-store sales? And how do we use that information to test what really matters for site optimization? So we tried a few different things to answer these questions. One of the approaches was that we took a couple different data sets and tried to do a matchback process. So we tried to capture information like an email or a phone number online, and then capture that same information from customers in the store, and then use those same points to attempt a one-to-one connection. That was really difficult for us. We had trouble getting clean data on the website, difficulty getting valid sample size, because generally people don't want to give you their email and phone number on your website, especially if they're not making a purchase. So we didn't really get very far with that method. The second thing that we did was that we tried assigning a value to some actions on the website that we thought were important. So Similar to the last case study that you heard, we were looking at things like how many people visited the store locator page and how many people were adding items to their cart but then not actually finishing the transaction on the website. So what we found was a couple things. This was a really narrow view. It left out a lot of actions on the website, and we knew that it did, but we just didn't know what those other actions were. And then it also didn't get a whole lot of buy-in from the company. So when we're reporting on things like store locators and this many people, added something to their cart, but then they didn't make the purchase, that just didn't really carry a whole lot of weight in really providing the value that digital adds to the company as a whole. So at the same time as we were trying these couple methodologies, we also introduced on-site web testing. So we had a lot of opinions with that, both from internal employees and external agencies about what we should be testing. So the end result of that was that we had a backlog of test hypotheses, but we really didn't have a clear way to decide which tests would have the most impact. So both of these scenarios really led us down the path to purchase intent. It came in and helped us in both areas. So first, it showed us the site actions that in fact did lead to offline sales, and it also definitively showed us which of those actions were most important, which we use that information to then drive our testing efforts. So if we move on then to the next slide. So purchase intent really quantified those key website actions into a currency that leveled the playing field for digital. So for many companies, that currency would be dollars or revenue. For US Cellular, it's subscribers or new lines of service. So you can imagine, every month the person who manages the digital channel, who also happens to be my boss, is sitting in the same room with somebody who manages the call center and the retail channels. Everybody is asked to report on how their channels are doing, which for us means how many new lines of service did you drive, how many current customer renewals did you generate. Every so often the budgets get shifted between these different groups, and it's a little bit of a friendly competition in a budget finite world. So it was just, for digital, it was really difficult because we just weren't able to speak in the same terms as everybody else. So when the call center manager is able to say, we received this many phone calls and we generated this number of new subscribers based on those phone calls, it's pretty cut and dry. Same with retail. So that manager can also say, we had this many people who walked into the store, this many of them bought something, here's how many subscribers and renewals that resulted in. So then comes the digital manager, and he starts talking about things like, we delivered 6 million display impressions, and our search impression share is 82%. We had 650,000 clicks, and 100,000 visitors used the store locator, and so on and so on. This type of information just was not valuable to the company and made it seem as though digital is not as valuable of a channel as these other sales channels like the call center and the retail store. So now, after purchase intent, we can say that we know that this number of people clicked on the chat now, or added something to their cart, or visited the store locator page, which contributed to X number of in-store line sales. So we're able to add that, to quantify that line sale, which was missing before. So really, we're no longer guessing, and we're able to assign a value to people doing research on the website. So that really solved for our first question, which was, what is the value of the website to offline sales? So now, how did we use that information to inform testing? So as I said before, and many of you have likely experienced, we have a lot of opinions on what we should test on the site. So the copywriter might want to test the copy, the creative agency might want to test the call to action, that kind of thing. So we've done some testing on the online store funnel, which is a good thing for any e-commerce site to do, but we also really wanted to focus on driving offline sales because that's where the majority of sales happen for US Cellular. So until purchase intent, that was a much less clear path to meet that objective, and what we found with purchase intent was rather surprising. So what we found was that the leading indicator of an offline sale was actually visits to the offers area of the website. It wasn't the add to cart or the store locators that we had previously been looking at. So that really kind of changed our process and what we focused on for testing. We've already been able to complete a couple of fairly simple tests, things like just changing the name on the offers navigation element. So you can see that here. So we tried a couple different iterations of that. This was really pretty easy to implement, gave us some great results, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. So now we're also looking at ways to get people to use the chat now or the store locator, because we now have evidence that shows that those are things that do drive people to buy. We're also planning some tests on our offers page itself and the content, because the purchase intent research showed us that getting people to engage with that page really increases their likelihood to convert. So really, you know, the end result was that we still have that long list of tests and hypotheses, but now we're confident in the order of them in which we're executing, and that they're prioritized correctly, because that's, you know, what purchase intent told us. Okay, so now if we go on to the next slide, I'll show you some of the early results that we got from that, that term change. So all that we did is we did a couple versions of, instead of using the term offers, we used things like promos, deals, that kind of thing. And what we found was that the winner actually netted us a 23% improvement in driving site visitors to that offers page, and a 61% improvement in the lifetime value of those visitors. So we got some great early results from a quick test, and we would have never done that test without the purchase intent research. So up next, you know, we're going to continue going down our list of tests, and also plan to rerun the purchase intent analysis next year, and just, you know, keep going with our testing, and hope for, you know, as valuable of results as we found with just that simple offers test. So that's it for me, and I'll pass it back over to Dave.
Great. Well, thank you, Katie. And just a quick reminder, if you do have any questions for Katie and the work that's been done there, feel free to put them into the interface, and we will certainly have some time here at the end to get to them. And I'll just reiterate, you know, that was a great example of number 2 that we're talking about today, which is, you know, having a very informed test plan to make sure that you are optimizing the most high-value things, especially when you have an offline component to your business as large as that. But I don't want to gloss over the fact that number 1 was really the foundational work that allowed this. And as Katie mentioned, you know, having all of these actions that we're able to value in terms of dollars or subscribers in this particular case really helps to drive that media spend in the first place. It's getting a lot of that traffic there that we can then use testing to improve upon. So really a good double-edged sword to approach making sure that we're getting the best out of our marketing budgets there. So the third thing that we want to talk about here today is really this idea of crafting a message. And we're going to use the example of a client of ours, Forever 21, who many of you know is a fashion retailer here, very, very popular. And what they are looking to do here is use purchase intent and use predictive analytics to, first of all, yes, drive the media spend and understand which channels touch and should be used at what touch points during the funnel. But also, a really interesting thing for marketers to look at is not necessarily where we should be spending money, but sometimes where we shouldn't be spending money. We start to understand at this point that we can apply predictive analytics to user profiles and behaviors, anonymous or otherwise, depending on the customer data sets that you're using and whatnot. Purchase intent can help you to predict what a person would be likely to respond to. And whether that's an actual channel or a marketing campaign that you're running at a particular point in the marketing process or the path to purchase, or whether it's an actual message that you're going to give to someone at a particular time. These sorts of things can be very, very important in terms of laser focusing the marketing campaigns that you're running. And in the age where we're starting to get tools and technologies that allow us to have this massive customization, which sounds kind of strange to say, but that one-to-one marketing, that personal marketing at scale, this becomes extremely important. So understanding whether or not you need to do a full air cover campaign of the branding, upper funnel sorts of things to someone, or if they're already aware of you. So did you need to pay for that extra impression when someone would have come into the store anyway? Or did you have to send an offer for 20% off when someone would have bought that particular thing at full price? These are the kinds of questions that you can start to understand and start to predict the answers to that with a high degree of probability and confidence. So this is really what we're after in this particular case study, is to, yes, understand what each of these actions are worth, understand what sorts of things we want to be optimizing, but then start to understand how are we going to craft this massive personalization messaging to our customers across the different channels and the different mediums in which we connect. So for Forever 21 specifically, these guys have a wonderful fan base here. They've got a great client base of young women, and the great thing about young people is that they get older and they tend to have more purchasing power as they do so. So this brand loyalty becomes really, really important, and there's lots of activity out there that's being done to facilitate and foster that, to make sure that great customers are still out there working with and being consumers of great brands. So they have active social campaigns, right? They've got a lot of organic work that's happening. There's a lot of paid search, there's display, there's programmatic, there's email marketing, there's every touch point you could imagine. And of course, there's offline campaigns as well, traditional marketing and media campaigns that are running as well. So the idea here is there's a ton of opportunity here to actually reach people and engage with those people with that right messaging. Now the trick here is to figure out what should that messaging be. And this is where predictive analytics can really, really help out. So by using these sorts of tools and techniques and methodologies, we're able to use things like purchase intent to understand a particular segment of users and apply a particular lead score or apply a particular probability of a response from a message over a channel at a particular point in the marketing funnel. And that really helps us to do two things. So ultimately at this point, by using these sorts of analysis techniques and bringing this into the processes that are used in the marketing department, we're able to really kind of start to answer that age-old question that John Wanamaker made famous, which is, I know I'm wasting at least half of my marketing budget. The trouble is I just don't know which half. Well, we can start to use data and predictive analytics to get a pretty good idea of which half doesn't need to be spent and where to spend the other half. And that's really what we're doing here. So we can start to use this in media mix modeling to understand what are the right channels that we should be investing heavily in, and then more importantly, what is that message that we should use that channel for? Is retargeting going to be a better channel for us at the very last chance to purchase? We know you've had this in your shopping cart, here's 10% off to go and finally buy it. Or could it be used to continue to interact people with the brand after you've bought something? Hey, you bought this particular top, now here's some bottoms or pants or socks to go with those shoes. You can start to really understand what people are more likely to respond to, build those audiences, and then have a very laser-focused approach to how you're going to spend those media dollars. And ultimately, this allows us to get to that goal of personalization at scale, which is to say, if we have lots and lots of customer attributes that are built into the models and we have lots of touch points and interactions, we can very, very accurately predict what someone would be likely to respond to, and then start to craft that message and build those campaigns. And in many cases, a lot of these campaigns can now be automated and built out programmatically, built out based on rules, and there's lots of ways to actually execute on this idea of mass personalization. So all of this comes back to knowing rather than guessing. And I think what we've seen in these three case studies can really be summed up in the data that you have now can probably be used to help you make better decisions tomorrow. And I think, like we saw, there's lots of ways to do this, specifically in the marketing space that we focused on here today, and a bit into the customer space. But really, a lot of folks are using this, and there's a lot more who have big opportunities to start using these sorts of things. Ultimately, what we end up with is a situation where there's kind of some next steps to think about. So if you're already doing this, fantastic, and as Katie said, there's always room for improvement and more modeling and additional projects around predictive analytics, and it's a really good feeling to know rather than to have that gut feel. So lots you can already be doing, but if this is something that's new to you, there's a few things you want to take a look at. Number one, you want to take a really honest look at yourself and understand where you are with respect to your digital data and analytics maturity. So if you have a website but you still have a very basic web analytics implementation and that's it, or you haven't gone very far down this path, you're probably not going to start out here with predictive analytics. You're probably going to move on to the second step here, which is to make sure that you have the data you need and that you trust the data you need. And I'll reiterate here that you don't need to have a multi-million-dollar implementation of all kinds kinds of data repositories and whatnot to start doing this. You can start using these models with the data that you have, as long as you trust it. And that's the second piece here. So if you've trusted your web designers to slap some JavaScript on the footer of every page of your website, you probably find yourself in a situation where you look at metrics that you may or may not find useful, but at the end of the day, you don't trust them. Somebody says, well, you know what, that one doesn't look right. I know we had this much sales, and the web analytics tool says we had this much, so therefore I'll throw out all the other analysis that you've done. As everybody knows, data can be tortured, twisted, and turned to make it say just about anything you want. And if you have any doubt in the integrity of the data that you're looking at, oftentimes that will happen and undermine decision-making or database decision-making. So making sure that you go through the processes to put that foundation, that plumbing in place, whether that's customer data or offline data or operational data or sales data or point-of-sale data, or if it's web data or app data, whatever those happen to be, making sure that those are implemented rock solid is really the thing you need, the foundation you'll need to build upon. And the third step is really activate your data in any way, shape, or form. So whether it's prescriptive analytics or whether it's looking at historical things to start to make better decisions about the future, looking at just reports that you get on a monthly basis to show you what worked and what didn't, or if it's starting to actually use data science techniques and tools to start to model this data and really start to get some predictive models that will tell you what you could expect to have happen from a probabilistic standpoint, those are the ways that we're going to activate this data. And it really is not about collecting it. I've rarely come across people who have a problem collecting data. In this day and age, data is everywhere. The bigger problem and the questions that we get asked on a daily basis is, how do I make use of this data? How do I turn this data into dollars and make it valuable? And predictive can be a wonderful way to do that, and specifically purchase intent. Whether you're in the retail space where you're dealing directly with the B2C consumer-based economy, or in the B2B space, or whether you have an offline store like we've seen, or an online shop, these methodologies can be used. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Michelle, and as we mentioned before, we have some questions, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Dave. We do have a lot of questions coming in, and just as a reminder, you can ask questions through the questions panel on your screen. We've got 3 experts on the line right now. We've got some general questions and some questions relating to the specific use cases we heard about today. So Dave, I've got a couple of questions for you. The first one is, what tools, in addition to basic web analytics, are needed or are useful for predictive analytics?
Yeah, great question. So there's kind of two sets of or two sides of a technology stack that you really want to look at when you're starting to build out some models. The first is, where and what kind of data are you getting? So if you're going to be doing anything with customer level data, you probably want to make sure you have a CRM in place. If you're doing anything with, like we talked about today, things that are happening on a website, you want to make sure that you have a very rock solid web implementation or analytics implementation, or if you're using apps, the data collection side really has to be solid. As an example, the US Cellular example was done using Google Analytics Premium as the main clickstream web analytics tool collection. That data was then brought out through BigQuery, and again, this is all storage, extraction, and collection. The second set of tools is what you're going to use to model, and we're probably beyond programs like Excel and whatnot. At this point, we're using things like SAS and R to actually build these models. And of course, there's a whole lot of different types of models and different applications for these things, depending on what you're likely to be doing. But the point is, I think, with a number of free tools, you can get started, right? R is not a paid solution. It's you've got free versions of Google Analytics, you've got free versions CRMs, and of course you've probably already got a lot of data and systems that you have paid for, and a quick audit of those data sources can tell you what sorts of analysis you can do, and then the analysis tools can be used to perform that analysis.
Thanks, Dave. So this is another one for you. What would be the difference in your approach to purchase intent on a non-e-commerce website versus an e-commerce website?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would first of all just reiterate that 2 of the 3 case studies we shared today did not have a significant e-commerce or at all an e-commerce position here. This was using these models to predict in-store sales and offline retail outlets in large part. So I think whether you have an e-commerce shop or not, that's a pretty interesting thing, is that we can use things like, there's beacon technology where you could have an intern sitting at the door with a clicker counting people who walk in the door, and as long as you have that input, it can be used in one of these models. So you're really limited only by your creativity and imagination and sorts of what sorts of things you can put into these models. A great example, one of the early use cases for Google's BigQuery to analyze lots and lots of data found that in retail sorts of convenience store locations, they brought in inputs that were predicted weather, not the actual weather that occurred, but the weather predictions that were happening. And they found that if you had rain, snow, or bad weather being predicted, there were 2 sets of SKU numbers that would really shoot up in terms of purchase, and that was alcohol and tobacco related ones. So storms come and people would go and get their beer and cigarettes before they shut the door and let the snowstorm come in. So these sorts of things can be modeled. In the B2B space, it doesn't always have to be a purchase, and I think Katie's example was a great one. It's not about dollars and cents, it's about new subscribers and lines, and whether if you're in a B2B place that you have very long paths to purchase and whatnot, you can look for leads and you can start to optimize not sales but any of these micro conversions along the way. So lead qualification steps, and of course this moves its way into using this for lead scoring models. So predictive and specifically purchase intent can be used across just about any sort of business that you might be engaged in.
Perfect. So Katie, let's go back to your case study now. The question for you is, how often would this analysis need to be updated?
Sure. So for us, I would think, and probably in general, I would say at least 3 times a year. And then also the other thing that we've talked about is we've made some fairly substantial enhancements to our website and are now offering some new features and functionality. So we recently introduced a recommendation engine that shows, related products based on what you have in your shopping cart. So once that's live for a little bit and we have enough data on it, enough visits and interactions with it, we'll be running an update of the purchase intent analysis to include that and those actions in it. And then I think even if you don't have major new functionality, you'd probably still want to do it 3 to 4 times a year, just depending on, your seasonality, how your sales cycle runs, and that kind of thing.
Perfect. Thank you. Joe, I don't know if you're still on the line, but we have a question here that ties back to the automotive use case you told us about.
Sure.
Oh, great. So the question is, how has this information impacted digital media investment across channels?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's had some pretty far-reaching opportunities for us to apply this kind of across the board in terms of digital media investment and how those dollars are optimized channel by channel, search, email, display, and so on. It's pretty powerful now that we know how much each website activity is actually worth in terms of revenue by product, and it's a pretty small jump to turn that into an understanding of how much profit does each website activity kind of predict, right? So with that in mind, we're basically able to get to a point where we're establishing allowable thresholds for what is profitable and what is not. And so a good example here, if an email sign-up coming from our tires campaign is predicted to represent $60 in profit, but we know that each of those actions are actually worth it's worth $60, but it takes us maybe $50 to drive. We're going to look to actually expand. There's an opportunity here to increase our share because there's level of profitability that exists, even though that initial CPA might be a bit scary on the surface. Now, in the past, that CPA was always just compared to, well, how do we do on last week's report? How do we do, a year ago, a week ago? This is all kind of relative optimization, and it's just, what we're trying to pursue is kind of a path of absolute optimization where we actually know the value, and we're pegging ourselves not how did we do last week in kind of a relative, review, but how are we doing against what is actually profitable for the business's bottom line? That allows us to know a little more than our competitive set, know when we need to make a bet to increase share, and really compare our CPAs against the true value of those actions. So that's an opportunity where it helps us to kind of understand that, you know what, we've had some really great growth opportunity across display. On the other side of the fence, we're finding a few specific, keyword groups, keywords themselves where the CPA isn't quite lined up where it needs to be. So if it's costing us $4 to drive a store locator action for brakes, but we know that's only worth $3 to us, we know we've got some work to do. So the great thing here is it's not just purchase intent doesn't only make a case for how to invest more and spend more across the board, but it actually does help you identify some areas to shift away from and your best bets of where to invest that next dollar moving forward.
Thanks, Joe. Dave, I think this is a question for you. How did you assess the cost per click for each of the actions a consumer took on the site that led to a specific offline sale? In other words, how do you attribute the cost of a click to a purchase?
Yeah, so we're really, as Joe was kind of alluding to, we're looking for the action, the behavior, or the attribute that is predictive of a particular financial outcome. So what we looked at, and this is where the model comes in, we take all of the data that we have access to. So whether it's customer attributes, or your typical socio-demographic, psychographics, along with the things that they're doing and digital touch points they're responding to. You can also look at geographic boundaries, so you can understand that certain things that are happening within certain market DMAs or zip codes and whatnot are driving particular in-store sets. You take all these data sets, you run them through the model, and that's kind of where the magic happens of the different modeling techniques that are out there. And ultimately, these models will give you a prediction of which of these factors are significant and which are not. And those that are significant, you look at the actual value that they are predicted to provide, and whether that's revenue metrics, or whether it's profit metrics, or whether it's subscriber metrics, whatever that happens to be for you, you now have an idea of what the probabilistic outcome is of one of these things happening. Now you can make these models more sophisticated by adding segmentation in there. You can certainly refine these, and should refine these, because at the end of the day, a model is a model. It is not going to be 100% perfect and 100% accurate, but you can also start to test these models. So you could say, the model tells me that if I were to increase spend in this particular area for this particular segment, then I would get this outcome. And if you do get that outcome, fantastic, you've got a great model. And if you don't have that outcome, you can use that to come back, feed and refine that model, so that it's like a great piece of art. You're never done. It's never perfect. It's just at a point where at some point it becomes good enough to put out there in the showroom. So ultimately, these models are always being refined. And I think Katie made a great point as well. Even if you had the perfect model that's ready to go today, things change tomorrow, whether you're making changes to your digital properties and assets and campaigns, or whether the market around you is changing. You have competitors that are coming in and doing new things that you won't be able to predict. So there's lots and lots of different ways that you can start to bring in lots of different signals and then build these models to get this predictive outcome.
Great, thank you. Katie, a couple of questions for you here. The first one is, do you use Google Tag Manager? And if yes, how have you used it for tracking?
We actually use a couple different tag management systems. So we do use GTM. Mostly we use that on landing pages and those sort of things that are run by our agencies. And then we also use Signal, which used to be BrightTag. And that's really our main one that we use site-wide. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question? How is it for data collection?
And if yes, how have you used it for tracking?
For tracking? Hopefully I'm getting at what's being asked here, but so we use it just for our general Google Analytics implementation and general site tracking, and then we also use it for tracking a lot of our ad server outcomes. So a lot of our floodlight tags are run through Signal or a GTM, depending on which page on the site you're looking at. So it's really kind of our primary mode of website data collection, whether that's on our site at large, our landing pages, or some of our kind of micro subdomains, that kind of thing.
Okay, another question for you is, what was the data collection process like?
For the purchase intent analysis, the data collection process was actually pretty simple for us. We leveraged data that already existed, so from a few different sources. So like Dave had mentioned earlier, we utilized Google Analytics Premium and port that data into BigQuery, and then it was extracted from there to get all of our clickstream and website actions. And then we also introduced a couple data sources on top of that. So one of those was we worked with our media agency to incorporate spend data, because we wanted to make sure that we weren't overstating the role of the website when we had increased or decreased media spend, that kind of thing. And then the third source was our CRM information, and so that we could bring in in-store sales data.
Perfect, thank you. Katie, I have a couple other questions for you here. The first one is, how else do you plan to use the PI results, or is it just for testing?
So testing was our first use case. We've done a lot of work. I know that in the automotive use case, they talked about using it for optimizing marketing, and so that's probably going to be our second. So we have begun media planning for 2016, especially Q1, and one of the topics up for discussion is, of these valuable actions that purchase intent has identified on the website, what should we be using as an optimization metric for our media, including search, display, even email? So instead of always trying to drive people to do an online purchase, we simply know that some people just aren't going to buy online. They want to go into the store, particularly with cell phones. They want to hold the phone. They want to play with it. They want to better understand pricing options and that kind of stuff. So, so which of these metrics should we be looking at to start driving people for in-store purchases instead of only optimizing our digital media for an online purchase?
Thank you. Dave, I have a question for you. How does all of this fit into attribution modeling?
Yeah, great question. Gray areas and fine lines are abundant in digital media these days, and that may be one of them. Attribution modeling is really about building a model that helps you understand the impact of a particular spend on a particular channel in this larger path to purchase. So lots of different ways to do that. Traditionally people have looked at something like a last click model that was very traditional in early analytics tools, and still many of the reports you look at in the common web analytics tools today use that model by default, which is to say, if I were to find your website on an organic search, and then I sign up for a newsletter, and then you send me a newsletter and I click on that, and then I follow you on Twitter, and eventually I click on a tweet and purchase something, which of those three touch points would get credit for that conversion? In the last click attribution model, Twitter would get all of the credit there, and of course we all know intuitively that's not 100% right. So we started to look at other ones, and there's all kinds of models where you can take the first click, or you can use a linear approach. You can give equal attribution to every touch point. You can use a time decay model, and then of course we get into the more sophisticated algorithmic driven models that you get with things like Google Analytics Premium, and of course you take that another step further and you have the actual attribution modeling tools that are out there from various third parties that can help you understand everything from television attribution all the way through to your very specific online channels. So it is using your data and modeling the impact that you have from each of these channels. Predictive is really kind of a big umbrella of all this kind of data modeling that we can do using historical data, to predict the future. So of course, we can use this to inform these models and say, I understand that this particular action or touch point or behavior is worth this much money to me, and that can actually be thrown into an attribution model to start to understand, what the output of those models should be with respect to media mix planning and actual budget allocations. So they very much work together and within the same sphere. Hopefully that's an answer.
Thanks, Dave. And I think, Katie, we'll end on a question or two for you here. Did U.S. Cellular work with its retail and call center teams at all to make strong correlations and conclusions when it came to purchase intent? So maybe tell us a bit about how the purchase intent findings were shared within the broader organization to generate understanding and alignment.
Sure. So I'll say that's a work in progress, but it's going very well. So one of our key reports that we generate every month is a scorecard. So it has kind of the different digital marketing channels going down the left column, and then it has kind of our key outcome metrics going along the top. So it has things like how many visitors were driven to the site, how many new subscribers were generated via purchase on the website. So one of the ways that we started introducing the purchase intent information was that we started adding a couple new columns onto that report and then explaining them underneath. So now we have, I can't remember the exact headings, but now we have like number of visitors who researched online and purchased offline, and that is a direct result of the numbers that came from purchase intent. So we look at all of those different site actions on the site and what do those equate to in terms of number of new subscribers. So let's say, just for an example, a visit to our offers page equals, 0.25 of a new subscriber, and we had 4 of those in this month. So but then a 1 in that column. And so it has generated a lot of conversation and discussion, which is great. That's step 1, right? Is just getting people to pay attention, number 1, to what you're saying, and then to work with them to get buy-in. But like I said in the presentation, it has really allowed us to speak the same language and say, we know that these are the valuable actions. This is the percentage of a new subscriber that they would contribute to in-store. So now we can actually put, a hard number on that report every month for how many offline sales did the digital channel contribute to. So hopefully that answers that question.
I think so. Thanks. It's a great story. I appreciate you sharing that with us, Katie. Dave and Joe, I actually do have several questions from people asking exactly how Cardinal Path works with organizations like U.S. Cellular. So what are the consulting services Cardinal Path offers for purchase intent models?
Sure. So, the 3 case studies we presented here, Cardinal Path did work as the agency with the clients that we looked at here. We have a number of different ways we can engage with our clients, whether that's a simple defined project base or whether it's an ongoing retention model where we continue to build upon additional projects and additional work. As Katie mentioned, this wasn't the first project we did, and it is already talking about the next project. So lots and lots of different ways we can help our customers make the most of their data and really start to extract that value and activate it.
Thank you. So that is all the time we have for today. If we didn't get to your question, we will follow up directly via email. I'd like to thank our speakers, Katie, Dave, and Joe, for sharing your expertise with us all. And as promised, we'll send out the recording of this webinar along with some supporting materials in the next day or so. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please get in touch with us by email at info@cardinalpath.com. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day, everyone.